Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the first BMAG Podcast. My name is Adil and I'll be the host, and with me I have Yousuf Farooq. So BMAG stands for the Bridgeford Muslim Action Group, and it was born out of a need that we identified. It was a group of Muslims that got together in Bridgeford, and we were concerned with the lack of response to the Gaza attacks. It was a grassroots movement, and we wanted it to be centered on action. We wanted to find out what we, as a local community, could do to help with any Muslim issues, Muslim-centric issues that were affecting the local community. So we organized the first Vigil for Peace in Bridgeford, first of its kind in Bridgeford, where we called people of all faiths and no faith to come together to mourn, to share in our shared confusion and frustration about what was happening in Palestine, and to come together as a community. It was well attended. We had poetry read by local youth, and we had speakers from all across the board, including the Jewish Voice for Labour and the Nottingham Council of Mosques. That was the first action that we took, and we were proud with that action, but we knew that we can't just stop there. One of our aims is to do as many actions as we can to engage with the community, to talk about social justice issues, to raise the profile of the British Muslim and issues that we come across. And that's obviously the highlight of today is Palestine, but we also want to go on to talk about social justice issues like the food crisis that we're going through, housing crisis, food poverty, a refugee crisis. There's a range of issues that we need to tackle, and inshallah, our long-term goal is that we can work with the local community, organizations that already exist, to work towards those goals. That leads us to the podcast. So today is the first in a series. We are aiming to do 2 podcasts a week to discuss, again, social justice issues that are affecting the British Muslim population on a global scale, international issues, and also on a local scale too. I'd like to start these podcasts while the wars are going on, because this is obviously on everyone's mind, with a brief of where we are at the moment. And today is day 95 of the war, day 95. And the latest figures coming from, I think, Al Jazeera, the Gaza Health Ministry say 126 Palestinians were killed on Tuesday, and at least 23,210 people have been killed, and over 59,000 have been injured. What else have we seen in recent history? For the second time this month, the Biden administration has bypassed Congress to approve an emergency weapons sale to Israel covering $147.5 million dollars worth of equipment, including fuses, chargers, and primers, which was on top of already the sales of 155 mil shells that Israel purchased previously. Another fact that we've come across, such as the scale of the genocide, that the medics in Gaza have coined a new abbreviation, WCNSF, and that stands for Wounded Child, No Surviving Family. So the topic of today is Palestine, and how did we get here? We wanted to talk about not only, and just as a by way of a reminder, we're not going to go into the details of the Palestine history, but more we're looking at how did we get here in the sense of us as a community, where this war has been going on for 75 years, but our response to it is become so inadequate, and we seem not to be able to respond in a way, in a unified voice, to get our frustrations across. So I'd like to ask Yousuf if you'd like to introduce yourself first before we go through the same questions.
Yeah, so my name is Yousuf Farooq, and back in 2014, on one of Israel's many assaults on Gaza, during my teenage days, I was horrified by what was going on, and I slowly began to become more involved in Palestine activism. And Palestine activism for me really was an entry into other forms of activism. And I'm involved in the local community as well, on a range of issues. But I try to talk mainly about Islamophobia and issues regarding the Ummah.
Perfect. And I'd just like to remind anyone who's logging in and watching live, there is a bit of a delayed feed, but there is a comment section if you want to leave your questions. If you have any questions along the way, leave it in the comment section and we'll collate them at the end. And just bear with us as well. This is our first a live stream, and if there's any technical difficulties, we'll try and fix them as soon as we can. But thank you for joining nonetheless. So Yousuf, you wear a number of different hats.
Yeah.
You've worked with the Bridgeford Muslim Action Group, and also you work closely with the Nottingham Council of Mosques and the Nottingham Palestine Solidarity Campaign. Just by way of an introduction to the topic, why, and it might be obvious, but why should we care about Palestine? Why should we care about what's happening in Gaza right now?
I think there are many different ways I can answer this question, and I'd like to bring in a few of these themes to us. Number one, what we are seeing is a full-blown genocide, a full-blown attempt to exterminate the entire population of Gaza, and at the same time, the incursions into the West Bank, the settler and state violence against Palestinians living in the West Bank, the warnings to leave the West Bank and enter Jordan have been intensifying daily. I don't need to go into too many details of what is happening. Many of you are aware. We've all been watching the news. But really, this is a humanitarian standpoint, and we're seeing a test of our humanity. If we cannot care about people who we may perceive to be thousands of miles away, then really, who will care about us? And I'll come later on to what I mean by who will care about us. In terms of understanding our challenges in terms of Islamophobia and how the two issues are related. There's also a religious standpoint from this. Palestinians are part of our Ummah, and whilst it's true that not all Palestinians are Muslims, we have to really understand that Palestine is the heart of the Ummah causes. We've seen on multiple occasions that Palestine has been a calling point for the unity within the Ummah. An example of that is the Qatar World Cup, where it was said that Palestine won the World Cup because on every opportunity we saw Palestinian flags waving. And it was the first time the World Cup being held in the Arab world. And Muslims also got a lot of backlash, particularly the Qatari government for not allowing alcohol in the stadiums, etc. But really it was a display at that moment. This is a display of Arab and Muslim culture. What is it that they care about? And they showed it was Palestine. And onto the religious standpoint from another angle, it is part and parcel of our religion that we become torchbearers and people who will uphold justice in every facet of society. The Quran is absolutely clear when it tells us to be persistent in standing up for justice. And I can go into much more detail, but many of you are aware of the hadith where Muhammad says that the parable of the Ummah is like a body, that if, and I'm paraphrasing here, that if one limb aches, then the whole body is restless with fever. And again, I'm paraphrasing that.
And we've definitely seen that because even though we mentioned that there's been a disparity between the response that we've expected from our leadership internationally, by the way, but the Ummah has definitely stood up. I mean, we've seen the scenes in football stadiums with Palestine flags all around chanting "Free Palestine," and even the very famous video of the Turkish man who was saying, "Just give us something." He's talking to Erdogan. He said, "Just give us something. Just give us the announcement, and we'll go to the gates." So definitely, and even locally in the UK, we've seen, like I said, people mobilizing on different, even just by themselves, organizing themselves, calling for people to go to things like demonstrations and protests, And a lot of the times, even, I mean, you can attest to what the PSC have said about the Muslim response, that there is definitely a desire from the Muslim Ummah to do something. I guess that leads on to the second question, which is, why is it that we've come to not be able to respond to these situations? Why is there such a silence from places where we'd expect it to come from?
I think there's been a whole long history of pacifying Muslims. There are many angles I can take. I suppose one thing is, in the post 9/11 world, people became fearful, and people spent much of their life trying to. I grew up in the 9/11 era, and most of my experience in childhood was trying to show that, the mainstream narrative was always that we need to promote Islam as a peace-loving religion. People were scared to talk about controversial issues, and there was a lot of silence in that aspect. But we also need to understand that there are bodies like the Prevent the Prevent Strategy now, which do stifle discussions on Palestine and other ummatic issues, if you were to put it that way. That is one of the reasons for the silence. But I think the Muslim experience, I was recently asked to give a presentation about Islamophobia and what is your experience as a British Muslim. And if you've ever been to any of my presentations, you know that I like slideshows and a lot of talking points, a bit of poetry in the background. It was quite different, because I did some reflection on what is the Muslim experience and what have I experienced in my life. And what I did was I displayed some photos, starting off in Bosnia, a genocide that happened before I was born, going on to the ongoing Uyghur genocide, the Rohingya genocide, that's happening in India and in Kashmir as well. These are some of the aspects that we are that I spoke about. That really is the Muslim experience that we face, and I think sometimes it is natural to get demoralized, but the question is, why are we here in the first place? And this is really what we need to tackle. Muslims in the West have a higher duty than to really mobilize, to take action, and to be torchbearers and upholders of justice, to speak truth against falsehood. We must understand a piece of privilege that we have, that many people in the Muslim world want to demonstrate, they want to take action, but they are unable to, because they have tyrannical rulers that have either normalized relations with Israel or just do not let any public assembly happen, no demonstrations, because they are fearful of losing their throne. We're also seeing as part of that a theology of quietism, where in order to preserve their thrones, there are a few so-called scholars who are sharing this idea that in the face of injustice, we must stay silent. But there are a number of factors at the end of the day behind the silence of Muslims. But really, in the UK in particular, we have things that restrict us, like Prevent, but ultimately we do have the right to assembly, and that is being restricted, which we can discuss later. But we can take action, and I don't think I think we are underestimating the power that we have. In certain cities, you have more than 100,000 Muslims, right? In Nottingham alone, we're speaking of a community of over 40,000. Now, if all of them had mobilized in one day, it would be a big part of history. But even if 10%, 5,000 people mobilized in Nottingham, we're still making history, and this is something that we need to develop.
So, I mean, you're absolutely right. There is, historically, there's almost no doubt that Muslim blood has been cheap.
Yeah.
You talked about 9/11 and the aftermath of that. I mean, we know how many hundreds of thousands were killed in Iraq.
Yeah.
We know how many tens of thousands were killed in Afghanistan and Syria and Libya, and the list goes on and on. And I think the point about Islamophobia, we can't hammer home enough how much of a global phenomenon that is, and if we're not tackling that now, and if you're not speaking out about that now, I mean, one of the talks that you did and I attended, we talked about the elderly man in Sheffield who was returning from his Fajr Salah. He was attacked from the back and stamped on his neck. And this is in Sheffield. This is just down the road from us. And these are happening. I mean, in London, where I grew up, it's almost a common thing to see hijab women who wear hijab targeted and sometimes ripped off. I think even recently in one of the Palestine demonstrations, it happened where a school child was having a discussion and the mother of another child abused the hijabi wearing young girl. So this rise in Islamophobia, how much of an impact is that having on the normalization of the killing around the globe, but also the fear that's instilled in the Muslim population? Do you think that there is something to say about that?
I think the way we understand Islamophobia really needs to develop. Many people perceive Islamophobia to be limited to hate crime. And yes, that is one aspect of it. So the things that you're talking about, and very serious things, we've had murders, we've had terrorist attacks on mosques, we've had bomb threats, we've had all of this, and this has increased since October the 7th. But ultimately, Islamophobia is directly connected to the war in Iraq. It's directly connected to Palestine. It's directly connected to any issue in the Ummah. The Ummah is being stabbed in every direction. And we need to feel confident in saying that Islamophobia is a facet of this. It's the driving force in many cases. And really, the minute you start to limit the agency of one single group, that is discrimination against them.
And what is it that we've got quite a clear definition of anti-Semitism, but is there something that we haven't defined Islamophobia?
We have defined Islamophobia. The All Parties Parliamentary Group have put together a definition of Islamophobia in consultation with Muslims, and their definition is that Islamophobia is rooted in racism and is a form of racism that targets notions of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. There are many aspects of this definition, but there are also working examples in this definition. And one of the working examples directly relates to our discussion today. That one of the working examples is denying Muslim populations a right to self-determination, e.g. by claiming that an independent Palestine or Kashmir is a terrorist endeavor. And this is something as Muslims that we should be pushing, this definition of Islamophobia.
Excellent. And I think what we want to move on to now is, and related to action, is what kind of action is the most effective? What kind of actions should we be doing? Because there's a lot of, depending on who you speak to, some people say, protests, they don't do much. And we've seen, obviously, and I think as expected, every time there's an attack on Palestine or Gaza, there's an uproar. Even when there was an attack on the Al-Aqsa Mosque, there was an uproar. But very quickly, it seems that the passion and the demonstrations and the will tends to wear away. And we're seeing that now. We're working towards the march on Saturday, which I think is going to be at least 500,000 people from what I've heard. And this is a global day of action. So there's definitely something different this time around. I think the energy that people have, it's obviously correlated with the amount of destruction that's going on and the genocide that's happening. But what kind of actions can we do, and what is most effective?
I think before I answer that question, I need to answer that question with a question. Is that why do we take action? If we take action thinking that we're going to get a result or expecting a result, it's not the right intention. We take action because we must take action. We must do anything in our capability. And this is a religious command. This is, to stand firmly for justice. So if, I've heard from many people that, we protested around the Iraq war and 1 million people came out and nothing happened, right? So does protest work? I've heard that argument so many times, that protest doesn't work because we've tried it once. We have to look at what is available in our hands and how can we physically tackle and physically address the issues to hand. So really, our intention should be that we are attempting to, and we are using our voice to bring about a change. Now, protest, we can't expect one protest to immediately end the genocide. It's not possible for one protest to do that. You see, mobilization and action requires something sustained. So if we look throughout history with apartheid South Africa, the boycott movement and the protest movement, it wasn't just pockets of actions here and there, etc. It was a long, sustained group of activists taking action all year around, right? They made South Africa the issue at every moment. And really that's what we should be doing with Palestine. This eventually is going to go away from the news. When there is a ceasefire, inshallah, and this is something that we do pray towards. What we should be looking at is how do we make Palestine the issue at that moment when people don't want to speak about it. There have been a lot of discussions that I've heard and I've been part of, people saying, have we done too much for Palestine? This is some of the questions that we're hearing within circles of Muslim leadership. Have we done too much? Are we making our focus away from our other activities right now? Taking action for Palestine. Look, if you are watching a genocide take place, televised on the TV screens, and the most documented genocide, right? And you're not seeing action, we can't afford to be having these questions. Really, firstly, we need to understand we must take action, and that really has to be something that we talk about all year round. And one way that I envision it happening is, of course, we've talked about there are other issues in the Ummah as well. Right now, of course, Palestine deserves all the attention it's getting. There's no doubt about it. But when it does fade away from people's minds, we need to continue to make that relevant. But we should also talk about how we can connect our struggles, how we can connect the Kashmir struggle to Palestine.
Because they are connected, aren't they?
Yeah, definitely.
We haven't talked about Zionism or the colonial project, but it's the history of these colonial project that has imprinted on all these different areas, and that's why we find them in those situations. So it is all connected, and I think it's very important to remember that once Palestine, the media focus has already started to shift.
Definitely.
But once that media focus shifts, we can't forget. And we need to, and this idea about persistence is very, very important because it will only work with persistence. I think we've got the evidence in the removal of Suella Braverman, where time and time again the protests came, and even though they tried to malign the protesters, even though we're protesting for peace and ceasefire, they were trying to malign us as calling for the destruction of a whole people, which was completely idiotic. But because of that pressure and because of the response, that pressure led to her resignation. So it's very important that we persist with it, and I think this is a call in Islam as well. So finally, just a word on other types of. We talked about protests quite a bit. Are there any other forms of action that can be effective in this kind of situation?
Palestinian civil society has called for BDS, boycott, divestment and sanctions. And it's really important that we understand BDS and how to enact it, Now, we just spoke about persistence, and I think that's really key to persistence. People will tire out of boycotting certain brands, etc. And BDS is something that requires strategy and persistence. If you look at the BDS National Committee website, you will see 4 categories of companies to target. So you've got your individual boycotts. That's companies like Ahava or Israeli settlement goods that we see in supermarkets, etc. Soda stream machines. And then you've got your divestment categories: Barclays, Elbit Systems, Volvo. There are pressure categories. You've got companies like Booking.com and Airbnb that let you rent apartments or hotels in settlements, even though we know settlements are illegal under international law. And companies as big as Google and Amazon are supporting Israel. So in this sense, what we do is we put pressure on these companies to say that you are clearly violating international law. And these are big companies that, at the moment, boycott alone may be able to interrupt, but it might not be able to make the change. So it's by putting pressure on them. And then you've got these organic campaigns. We've seen companies like McDonald's who served the IDF for free meals. And people were outraged and they started a boycott. And McDonald's have really felt this consumer impact, right? And they're trying to justify it. They're trying to say, well, they're franchises in each country. Some McDonald's have been forced into donating hundreds of millions of dollars towards Palestinian medical aid because of the backlash that they're receiving because of the boycott. But really, we need to think about it. Boycott. We need to educate the people. What are the companies we are targeting, and why are we targeting them? And BDS works. I mean, recently we've seen so many victories.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think if it didn't work, they wouldn't be calling to. I mean, in the US, I think there's a number of states that have already tried to ban boycotting in BDS. To make it illegal in those states. I think they already have done that, and they're aiming for the rest of the states to follow suit. And I know in Rushcliffe in Nottingham, they're calling for a similar motion to ban BDS or boycott against a certain nation.
So tomorrow, the anti-BDS bill is going through Parliament, and we coined it the anti-BDS bill, even though it has a different name. Because really, it is about BDS. The local MP in Rushcliffe, Ruth Edwards, has been a big supporter of this bill. Essentially, it will prevent local councils from boycotting any particular state. Now, as far as I'm aware, there is not a mass campaign for boycott of any other state than Israel. So this is absolutely about Israel at the moment. And it's going through its 3rd reading in Parliament right now. So it shows the impact. And really, we should be putting pressure on Nottingham City Council and Nottinghamshire County Council to disinvest immediately. And the key call is any company that is directly complicit in Israel's apartheid and genocide against the Palestinian people. So it requires strategy, it requires thought, and it requires persistence. For so many years, supermarkets have been told that these goods that you are selling are settlement goods. Settlements are illegal under international law, yet you continue to sell them. And that's why people have been creative in how they tackle supermarkets. Talking to branch managers and everything, that's already been done. It's already been done in Nottingham. It's already happened in cities across the UK and across the world. But they're not listening. So whilst we individually boycott it, we need to educate others about the boycott. And there have been many creative things that people have done. For example, flash mobs inside supermarkets, etc. And really, persistence is key. All year around, whilst these products are being stocked, we make the case for boycott clear.
Yeah, and just about the creativity. I think the Jewish movement in the Jewish Voice for Peace, especially in the US, they've been shutting down quite a lot of different public organizations, and it's been very fantastic to see. And just on that as well, if we don't get this BDS idea across, I think some of the local sellers, local shopkeepers that we've been talking about BDS and boycott, is that if there isn't a sustained movement, and if there's not enough people actively with what they're buying choose that path, they're not able to then stock the alternatives that can. So it is a bit of a cycle. So we have to encourage people who are obviously shopping, who have the buying power, but also the people that are supplying, to encourage them to shop in those places that are sympathetic to this cause. So I just want to take this opportunity to remind people, if anyone's watching us on the live stream, that we do have a comment section. If you've got any questions, I can see one of our assistants been furiously writing down some questions. We're going to take a quick break.
Sure.
I don't have the facility to put any kind of screen on, so it's just going to be here. But we'll be back in a few minutes with all the question and answer session. Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that slight pause. So we're back. We've got a few questions, and just to remind everyone, this is our first BMAG podcast. We're going to be doing one twice a week, so every Tuesday and Sunday, roughly at the same time at 7 p.m. So thank you for joining us. We've got Yousuf Farooq here, who's a student, who's a member of the Nottingham Council of Mosques and Nottingham Palestine Solidarity Campaign, and also active with BMAG with ourselves. So Yousuf, our first question, very much in line with what we've been talking about. What can we do at a local level in terms of activities to have a maximum impact for the people of Gaza?
It's a very good question, and I think it really brings on to what we need to do is community organizing. When we say grassroots, we need to understand what does that actually mean. And when we start networking within communities, each community can bring different skills. It can bring different ideas to the table. Around Gaza and Palestine at the moment, I mean, in terms of calls, our call should be definitely for a ceasefire now. There's been a lot of creativity in what's happening. We've seen occupations of train stations, which happened at the beginning. It happened in Nottingham as well. And we've seen a lot of impact, particularly how it just brings stuff to the attention of the news. There are a number of actions that you can do either individually or as a group. Banner drops, for example, displaying banners in public calling for a ceasefire, and local demonstrations. When BMAG held a vigil in Bridgford, it was a new wave in history, that we're going right into the roots of the community, and we are putting the message there at the doorsteps of our local MP. So if they're not getting the message, then we need to emphasize that message more. We began by many residents of Rushcliffe had spoken to me, saying that they are absolutely appalled at Ruth Edwards, the local MP's response to the Palestine crisis, that she's not even mentioning Palestine in her responses. We said, well, we need to show our people power. According to the last census, there are over 2,000 Muslims in the constituency of Rushcliffe. So we said, rather than individuals, sending, the same letter over and over, let's personalize it and let's use our people power to show that we are a force. Over 80 residents, signatories had signed this open letter. And to emphasize it again, we went to her doorstep and we held a vigil there. This is community organizing. And it doesn't need to be limited to Rushcliffe. Everyone within your constituencies listen, we are the ones who are giving you a vote. If you don't support our causes, then we will not vote for you, and we will vote against you. And I think at the moment it's crucial that we continue to emphasize, we continue to bring these issues to the ground, always make Palestine an issue. If we're starting to see momentum die down, then what is important is, if you have noticed that, work within your own communities, build your own networks, and begin to develop what you will be doing there as a community.
Yeah, and I think definitely the vote. I mean, if you're not going to vote for them, then they'll start listening.
Yeah.
But the main thing is another thing. I don't want to downplay protests. I mean, I know we keep banging on about protests, but one very encouraging story that I heard about one of the local protests actually was a local, I think a local, a fairly lady of not very political, doesn't usually go to protests, but she was passionate about stopping the genocide, and she noticed on one of the demonstrations, on a poster, a placard saying "Stop arming Israel," and she didn't know about how complicit the UK and the US are with arming the IDF and to enable the genocide to continue. So because of that placard, because she attended a protest, because of that placard, she decided to educate herself. And that motivated her to come out on more protests, to educate other people. So it is a bit of a snowball effect. I mean, even on a personal level, I learned so much by talking to people who go on protests. And when we went to London on the coach, we had so many good conversations with people from all different backgrounds. So it does more than just, it exposes you to other people. And sometimes you do need to have that experience with other people to do that. I think we'll move on to the second question, which is, are there any specific agenda items for BMAG to focus on in the next few months?
Yeah, so as I said earlier, that the key point on our agenda is Palestine. We will be continuing to do our new series, which is the Cinema for Change. This is bringing social issues to the light through cinema. Not everyone likes to read. And these events work as networking to get people together, to understand an issue from a different perspective. Our last screening was of a film called 5 Broken Cameras. And we got a lot of positive feedback from the attendees. A lot of people keep asking, when is the next one, and are pestering us. And, we're going to continue in that side. That's part of education as well as networking. As we keep saying, we need to keep bringing Palestine to the agenda. Even if it is, even if parts of mobilization is dying down, our work is to say, we're not going to let it die down. Education, we've started these podcasts. Really, we are all about action as BMAG. And it's consistently taking action. And this is something that we want BMAG to develop in, and I'm sure you can bring in some other.
Definitely, I think we've essentially is what I keep saying is that this what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Palestine is unprecedented. They've cranked up their violence and their actions to 11. It's really, really horrifying, and everyone knows the figures. So what I keep saying is, if it is an unprecedented time, but our response has to be unprecedented as well. If you've never gone to a protest and that's unprecedented for you, then you need to go to a protest. If you've been to a protest and you've not spoken about it to your friends or your colleagues at work, then that's unprecedented to you, then you have to do that. So we're doing literally everything that we can think of and more, and we're doing it on a regular basis. So that's why I called for a podcast every day, I think, initially, but I think that probably practically wasn't possible. But we're thinking about holding stalls outside, even on the high streets, outside markets, outside supermarkets. We're looking at doing meetings inside mosques, but we're not limiting it to the Muslim population. We're also looking at working with other organizations. So there's a lot of churches that are doing a lot of good work. There's a lot of organizations, non-religious organizations that are helping out as well. And organizations like Strive to highlight other issues as well. So we've got a lot planned. I think the main thing is if you're wanting to get involved and if you're wanting to contribute to this effort, we're not a top-down organization. It's a grassroots organization. We welcome anyone who wants to come and contribute. If you've got ideas, if you've got talents, definitely log on. We've got our Instagram page. Contact us directly. We can get you involved as well. So it's literally everything and anything. But right now, the focus, I think, because of the urgency of the situation, is Gaza. And then we'll take it from there. But I think it's a very good question. Finally, I think this is the last question we'll have time for. In view of the general election coming up, it's a very good question. Is there any thought of education and advocacy for candidates who support the rights of Muslim citizens and are against genocidal countries?
Oh, okay. This is a very good question and a very timely question, as we are expecting a general election in the next few months. 81% of MPs in the UK voted against a ceasefire or abstained. They didn't vote in favour of a ceasefire. In Nottingham City, where there are 3 constituencies, only 1 MP had voted in favour of a ceasefire. And if you look at Greater Nottinghamshire, including us in Rushcliffe, where there are 7 or 8 seats, no one had voted in favour of a ceasefire. So we need to understand that that vote was a litmus test for MPs, whether or not they will be able to support the Muslim population and their Muslim constituents. We even had Muslim MPs who shamefully voted or abstained in the ceasefire vote. And this is where we have to show that actually we can mobilize. I've heard, but so-and-so MP supported us in the past on this issue, he helped open our mosque, or they were active on this issue, or, he comes and visits us regular. The ceasefire vote was a litmus test. Yeah. Now, whilst we understand that if the British Parliament voted in favour of a ceasefire, it doesn't mean that the whole thing would come to an end, but it would be a point of pressure. It would be a beginning of a conversation on how do we pressure and stand up to Israel, who is enacting a genocide against the Palestinian people. But the MPs did not vote for that. And that's why I say it's a litmus test. They cannot be forgiven. And it's not only me saying that, but a collective of Muslim activists and individuals across the UK are calling for the Muslim Vote campaign. In the past, there was Operation Black Vote. And really, it's showing that Muslims are a key power base in multiple seats, and can make a difference and will be making a difference. And that's what we want to do. So in the seats where MPs have not voted in favour of a ceasefire, and if you are unsure, look at the Muslim Vote campaign website. It's a quick Google search, and look to tackle. There are some seats where if only Muslims voted, you could de-seat an MP, and there are some MPs with huge Muslim majorities, with huge majorities rather, but the Muslim vote is enough to make a dent in their voting pattern. So we say no to you because you did not support us, and we really need to push that.
Yeah, it's very important because it is a powerful lobby if we can organise. So the Muslim vote is very good. It's a very important step. I think this is going to be the final question. So we've got another one from you, Mahmoud. There is so much misinformation and disinformation. I think it is imperative we delve into the Israel-Palestine conflict over the last 75 years to educate the local community. It's a very important thing, and I think there is a lot of information. There's lots of books on the topic. I'm not sure how much we've got. We've got about 10 minutes. We scheduled it until 8 o'clock. Do you want to give us a brief about the Palestine or the dynamics of how we've got there in Palestine?
I mean, if you say 10 minutes, I'm going to take up 20 minutes. I know. So what I would say is that we have a duty to educate ourselves. We need to know what is it that we are talking about. And there are multiple ways you can do this. There's Palestinian film. Something that we're promoting. There are many books written on this topic.
I think it deserves a podcast in itself.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. How did we get here? education on Palestine. But this is something generations have to continually tell their children. You know, if you are a parent, you need to be educating your children about Palestine from a young age. So that they...
And I think it goes to show that if we're still asking this question 75 years afterwards, you know, and we're this far into it, it just goes to show how much work there is to do, and how much more awareness we need to have as you know, as an ummah about the things that are affecting our people.
And you've just said 75 years.
Yeah.
Last year when I was in Palestine, they were marking a centenary of the Balfour Declaration.
Exactly.
And in Ramallah, almost on every street corner, you know, you had an image of Balfour's face saying, "We've not forgotten." This was 100 years ago. One document had caused all of what is happening, the Balfour Declaration. So there's been a century of oppression, a century of injustice. And of course, it worsened in the Nakba in 1948. You had the Nazca and what we're seeing right now. I mean, we don't know what terminology they're going to call it in the history books. But really, 1940, we keep hearing enough is enough. It needs to end now.
Yeah.
That should have been our messaging in 1948.
Exactly.
Should have been in 1917. With the Balfour Declaration. And I said the centenary. It was over 100 years ago.
Yeah. How far do you want to go back? Because there's so many aspects to this, and you know, we talk about Zionism. People should know that this started with Christian Zionism, which gave the foundation of you know, this new form of Zionism that we've got in Palestine. So I think we'll wrap it up, because it does deserve a podcast by itself. Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there. Thank you for being our first guest and speaking so eloquently. So just a few follow-up notes that we will be having one on Sunday, and our plan is to have excuse me, a local action group, or a local group of sisters who have taken it on themselves to look at, in terms of BDS, what we can do. They're called the Conscious Shoppers. And they collate a list of local organizations, local businesses that are supplying alternatives, and they highlight these businesses, and we'll have them on Sunday to talk. We've got a few questions based for them. Again, we are building up to the 13th, which is a global day of demonstration. We have coaches, we've arranged coaches with PSC, local mosque, the Meadows Masjid as well, and Al Khazra. They are arranging they're arranging coaches on our behalf to go down to London. So if you're interested, then get in contact with us on our socials, and we can put you into contact with the right people. There are still spaces available. I think there's very limited spaces.
Limited spaces.
So they are getting taken up quite fast. So do act soon. And if you do have any questions that weren't answered, if you're part of the BMAG events group, you can contact us directly as well. And again, we'll be holding one on Sunday. So look out for this space. So thank you very much. And Assalamu alaikum.